The sigh that escaped my lips was heavy enough to sink a small boat. It was the same old song, a familiar tune my family loved to play, and guess who was always stuck footing the bill? My name is Ethan, and if there's one thing I've learned in my 47 years, it's that the word family can be a real mixed bag. Sometimes it's the warm blanket on a cold night, and other times it feels more like a tangled fishing net you can't seem to escape. For me, lately, it's been leaning heavily towards the latter. It all started, as most of these things do, with a seemingly innocent phone call. It was my younger sister, Chloe. Now, Chloe is, well, she's a character. Full of life, they say. I usually just say she's full of requests, most of them financial. She's 3 years younger than me, and ever since we were kids, she's had this knack for getting herself into situations that require a bailout. And guess who the designated rescuer has always been? Yep, you guessed it, yours truly. This time, the situation involved a fantastic investment opportunity that had suddenly turned sour. Apparently, a friend of a friend had this brilliant idea for a pop-up boutique selling artisanal dog sweaters. Chloe, ever the enthusiast, had jumped in with both feet, sinking a good chunk of her savings into it. Only, surprise, surprise, the market for hand-knitted sweaters for Chihuahuas wasn't quite as booming as predicted. The pop-up had flopped, and Chloe was now facing some serious debt. "Ethan, honey," she started, her voice dripping with that sugary sweetness she always used when she wanted something. "You won't believe the mess I'm in." I leaned back in my office chair, already feeling a familiar wave of weariness wash over me. I ran my hand through my thinning hair. "Let me guess, Chloe. It involves money?" She sighed dramatically on the other end of the line. "Well, yes, but it's not my fault. This guy, Mark, he seemed so sure. He even showed me projections." "Projections for dog sweaters, Chloe?" I couldn't help the sarcasm that crept into my voice. "Don't be like that. It could have been huge. Anyway, the point is, I'm a little short on cash right now, and there's this payment due." Her voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken question hanging in the air like a bad smell. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "How much are we talking about, Chloe?" "Just a small loan, Ethan. Just until I get back on my feet. $5,000. $5,000. Small for some, maybe, but for me it was a significant amount. I'd been working hard, saving diligently. I had plans for that money. A long overdue vacation, maybe even putting a down payment on a small cabin by the lake. Chloe's financial mishaps always seemed to derail my own plans. "Chloe, you know I've helped you out a lot over the years," I said, trying to keep my tone reasonable. "Remember the time you—" I trailed off, not wanting to list the countless times I'd bailed her out. There was the car repair, the unexpected rent increase, the urgent need for concert tickets. The list went on and on. I know, you're the best brother ever," she chirped, completely missing the point. "And I promise this is the last time. I've learned my lesson. No more investing in questionable dog fashion." I hesitated. Part of me, the older brother part, felt the familiar tug of responsibility. But another part, the part that had been stretched thin one too many times, was screaming, "Enough is enough." "I don't know, Chloe," I said slowly. $5,000 is a lot of money right now. That's when my mother got on the phone. Chloe must have put her on speaker. "Ethan, darling, is everything all right?" Her voice was soft, laced with that hint of concern that always made me feel like a terrible person if I didn't comply. "Mom, Chloe is asking for another loan," I explained, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Oh, well, you know how Chloe is," she said with a light chuckle. "She has such a big heart, always trying new things, and always needing a bailout," I muttered under my breath. "Now, Ethan, don't be like that," my mother chided gently. "She's your sister. Family helps each other out. It's just a small loan. You can afford it, can't you?" That was the magic phrase, the one that always got me. You can afford it. It didn't matter that I had my own goals, my own needs. Because I was responsible, because I had a stable job, I was apparently an endless well of financial support for everyone else. "Mom, it's not just about whether I can afford it," I argued, trying to explain my perspective. It's about Chloe taking responsibility for her own choices. This isn't the first time this has happened. But she's learned her lesson this time, I'm sure of it, my mother insisted. And it's just a small loan. Don't be cruel, Ethan. Your sister is in a tough spot. Don't be cruel. That phrase hung in the air, heavy with guilt. It was my mother's ultimate weapon, the one she deployed whenever I even considered saying no. And it always worked. Until now, maybe. I need to think about it. Mom, I said, a new firmness creeping into my voice. I can't just make a decision like this on the spot. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could practically feel the disapproval radiating through the phone. Well, don't take too long, dear, my mother said finally, her tone a little cooler now. Chloe needs the money soon. I hung up the phone, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. I stared out the window at the bustling city below. I'd always been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never said no. But lately, I'd been feeling a growing resentment, a sense of being taken for granted. Was I really being cruel by wanting to protect my own financial stability for once? The next few days were filled with subtle and not so subtle reminders from Chloe and my mother about the small loan. Texts, emails, even a couple of tearful phone calls from Chloe detailing the dire consequences if she didn't get the money soon. My mother, meanwhile, adopted a more passive-aggressive approach, making vague comments about the importance of family and how disappointed she would be if I didn't help my sister. One evening, I was at my usual Thursday night poker game with my friends, Daniel and Mark, no relation to Chloe's dog sweater partner. Thankfully, we'd been playing together for years, and they knew all about my family dynamics. So, how's the Chloe situation? Daniel asked, shuffling the cards. He knew the drill. I sighed, running a hand through my hair again. The usual. Full court press. Mom's laying on the guilt. Chloe's painting a picture of impending financial doom. Mark chuckled. Sounds about right. Remember that time she needed money for that essential trip to that spiritual retreat in Bali? We all laughed. Chloe's essential needs were often quite extravagant. The thing is, I said, growing serious, I've been thinking a lot about this. I've helped Chloe out so many times over the years, and it never seems to make a difference. She never learns. She just expects me to be her safety net. You're not wrong, Ethan, Daniel said, dealing the cards. You're a good guy, always willing to help. But there's a difference between helping someone and enabling them. Exactly, I exclaimed, feeling validated. I have my own life, my own goals. Why should I always have to put them on hold because Chloe can't manage her finances? Have you considered just saying no? Mark asked, raising an eyebrow. The thought had crossed my mind, of course, but the guilt trip from my mother always loomed large. It's not that easy. You know how Mom is. She'll make me feel like the worst son in the world. So what? Daniel said bluntly. Let her. You're a grown man, Ethan. You don't need her approval for every decision you make. Their words resonated with me. It was true. I was an adult. I had the right to say no, to prioritize my own well-being. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. The following Saturday, my mother called again. I knew what it was about before I even answered the phone. Ethan, have you thought about what we discussed? Her tone was carefully neutral, but I could sense the underlying pressure. Yes, Mom, I have, I said, taking a deep breath. And I've decided that I'm not going to give Chloe the loan. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears in my mother's mind grinding as she tried to process this unexpected response. What? Ethan, are you serious? Her voice was incredulous. Yes, Mom, I am. I can't keep doing this. Chloe needs to learn to be responsible for her own finances. But she's your sister, and it's just a small loan. She'll pay you back, I promise. Mom, with all due respect, she's said that before. Many times. And I'm still waiting for some of that money back. Don't be like that, Ethan. You're being so selfish. Her voice rose in anger. After everything we've done for you, there it was again. The vague reference to past sacrifices, the implication that I owed them. It was a tactic they'd used for years, and it was finally starting to lose its power over me. "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. There was a long pause. "We raised you, Ethan. We gave you everything you needed." "Yes, you did the bare minimum that parents are supposed to do," I retorted, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm grateful for that, but it doesn't give you the right to constantly guilt-trip me into funding Chloe's lifestyle." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I'd never spoken to my mother like this before. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Ethan," she said finally, her voice cold. "I thought you were a better son than this. And I thought you would understand that I need to set some boundaries," I replied, trying to remain calm. "I love Chloe, but I can't keep enabling her. This has to stop." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I knew I'd crossed a line, that things would never be quite the same with my mother again. But a small part of me, a part that had been buried for a long time, felt a sense of relief. I had finally stood up for myself. The fallout was immediate and predictable. Chloe called, her voice a mixture of anger and hurt. My mother sent a barrage of guilt-tripping texts. Even my father, who usually stayed out of these family dramas, called to express his disappointment in my lack of generosity. I held my ground. I didn't engage in lengthy arguments. I simply repeated that I wasn't going to give Chloe the loan and that I needed them to respect my decision. It was hard, incredibly hard. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I would remember all the times I'd put my own needs aside, all the times I'd felt used and taken for granted, and my resolve would firm up again. A few weeks passed. The initial storm of anger and disappointment from my family had subsided into a chilly silence. Chloe hadn't spoken to me since our initial phone call. My mother's texts were infrequent and curt. My father hadn't called again. I tried to focus on my own life, on the things that brought me joy. I started planning that vacation I'd been putting off. I even looked at some listings for cabins by the lake. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control over my own future. Then, one Tuesday morning, I received a phone call that turned everything upside down. It was from a local hospital. They were calling about my mother. She'd had a fall at home and had been rushed to the emergency room. The details were vague, but the tone in the nurse's voice was serious. My heart lurched. All the recent conflict with my family suddenly seemed insignificant. This was my mother. Regardless of our disagreements, I loved her. I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with worry. When I arrived, I found my father sitting in the waiting room, his face pale and drawn. Chloe was there too, her eyes red and puffy. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. My father looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. She tripped on the stairs, hit her head pretty badly. Chloe started to cry again, burying her face in her hands. I put an arm around her, trying to offer some comfort, even though I was feeling far from comforted myself. We waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a doctor came out, his expression grave. He explained that my mother had suffered a serious head injury. She was stable for now, but she would need surgery. The prognosis was uncertain. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. My strong, opinionated mother, lying helpless in a hospital bed. It was hard to believe. Over the next few days, the hospital became our second home. We took turns sitting with my mother, talking to her even though she was unconscious, hoping she could hear us. The tension between Chloe and me seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a shared worry for our mother. Even my father seemed different, quieter, more vulnerable. One afternoon, while I was sitting by my mother's bedside, my father came into the room. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside me. "Ethan," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, waiting. I wanted to say something," he continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. About the loan, and about how I spoke to you." I didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. He took a deep breath. "You were right, Ethan. About Chloe. About, about everything. We haven't been fair to you. My heart skipped a beat. This was the last thing I expected to hear. My father admitting he was wrong? It was almost unbelievable. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a genuine sadness. We've always favored Chloe. She's always been the more delicate one. And we expected you to always take care of her. It wasn't right. Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the raw emotion behind them. It was like a dam had finally broken, releasing years of unspoken feelings and resentments. Dad? I started, my voice choked with emotion. He held up a hand. Let me finish. I know I said some harsh things to you, called you selfish, but you weren't. You were just trying to set boundaries. Something we should have taught Chloe a long time ago. He paused, taking another shaky breath. Your mother. She feels the same way. This accident has made us both realize a lot of things. Life's too short for all this fighting. He reached out and put a hand on my arm, his grip surprisingly firm. Thank you, Ethan, for everything you've done for this family, even when we didn't deserve it. I squeezed his hand, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. A crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. Just then, Chloe walked into the room, her eyes still red from crying. She looked from me to our father, a question in her eyes. Your father was just apologizing, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Chloe looked surprised. Then her gaze softened. She came over and put her arms around both of us. We sat there for a long moment, the three of us, united by our worry for our mother and a fragile new understanding between us. But as we sat there, a thought flickered in the back of my mind, a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. My father's sudden apology, his unexpected admission of guilt. It felt a little too convenient, too perfectly timed with my mother's accident. Was it genuine? Or was there something else going on? Something he wasn't telling me? The thought cast a shadow over the fragile peace we had just found. Over the next few days, my father's newfound humility persisted. He was attentive at the hospital, always making sure my mother was comfortable, talking to the nurses with a politeness I'd rarely witnessed. He even started bringing me coffee in the mornings, a gesture so out of character it made me raise an eyebrow more than once. Chloe, too, seemed genuinely concerned, spending hours by Mom's bedside, reading aloud from her favorite books. It was like the accident had hit a reset button on our family dynamics. But that nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. My father's apology had felt sincere in the moment, but the timing still seemed off. Why now? Why when Mom was lying unconscious? Was it guilt? Or was there something else at play? A week after Mom's surgery, she finally started to show signs of improvement. She opened her eyes, mumbled a few words, and even managed a weak smile. It was a huge relief, and the atmosphere in the hospital room lightened considerably. One afternoon, while Mom was resting, my father asked if I could step out to the hallway with him. He looked more nervous than I'd seen him in years, fidgeting with his hands and avoiding eye contact. Ethan, there's something I need to tell you, he began, his voice low and hesitant. My stomach clenched. Here it comes, I thought, the other shoe dropping. It's about the house, he said, finally meeting my gaze. What about the house? I asked, a sense of unease washing over me. Our family home had been a source of stability for as long as I could remember. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Well, you know things haven't been great financially lately. This wasn't news. I knew my father's small business had been struggling for years. Mom had hinted at it a few times, but they'd always downplayed the severity of the situation. Yeah, I know, I said cautiously. Are you thinking of selling it? The thought made me feel a pang of sadness. So many memories were tied to that house. He shook his head. Not exactly, but, well, I took out a loan against it. My eyebrows shot up. You what? A loan against the house? How much? He mumbled a figure and my jaw dropped. It was a substantial amount, enough to put a serious dent in the equity. "Dad, why would you do that without telling anyone?" I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. He wrung his hands. "I didn't want to worry your mother, and I was sure I could turn things around. I had a few deals in the pipeline." His voice trailed off. "And those deals didn't pan out, did they?" I finished for him, the pieces starting to fall into place. He sighed heavily. "No. And now the payments are coming due and, well, we're in a bit of a tight spot." A tight spot. That was an understatement. Taking out a loan that size against the house was a huge risk. "So, what does this have to do with me?" I asked, a sense of dread creeping into my heart. I had a bad feeling about where this was going. He finally looked me straight in the eye, and the vulnerability in his gaze almost made me waver. "Ethan, I know I have no right to ask this after everything, but could you possibly help us out?" My blood ran cold. This was it. The real reason for the sudden change in his behavior. The apology, the attentiveness. It had all been a setup. He wasn't genuinely remorseful. He just needed something from me again. "Help you out how, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. "Well," he stammered. Just until I can get back on my feet. Maybe a small loan?" The irony was almost comical. He'd called me selfish for refusing to give Chloe $5,000, and now he was asking for a much larger sum to bail himself out. "How much are we talking about this time, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He mumbled another figure, and I almost laughed out loud. It was 10 times the amount Chloe had asked for. "Dad, are you serious?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "You took out a massive loan against the house without telling Mom or me, and now you expect me to just, what? Cover your payments?" He looked down at the floor again, shame etched on his face. "I know it's a lot to ask, Ethan, but we're family. We have to help each other. That's what you said about Chloe," I reminded him, my voice laced with bitterness. "But when I tried to set boundaries, you called me selfish." He didn't say anything, just continued to stare at the floor. "Dad," I said, taking a deep breath, "I'm not going to give you the money." His head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What? But what are we going to do? We could lose the house. Maybe you should have thought about that before you took out the loan, Dad," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not responsible for your financial decisions. But your mother, what about her? This will kill her if she finds out." That hit me hard. Mom's health was still fragile. The stress of potentially losing the house could have serious consequences. "Then maybe you should have thought about her before you put the house at risk," I retorted, my anger rising. "You can't just make reckless decisions and then expect me to clean up your mess." He stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You're just like your mother said, selfish and ungrateful." "No, Dad," I said, standing up to face him. "I'm just tired of being taken advantage of. I've always been there for this family, always ready to help, but it's never been reciprocated. It's always been about what I can do for you, for Chloe, never about what you can do for me." Our voices had risen, and a nurse was giving us a concerned look from down the hallway. We both lowered our voices, but the tension between us remained thick. "So, what are you saying, Ethan?" my father asked, his voice tight with anger. "You're just going to let us lose our home?" "I'm saying that you need to take responsibility for your own actions, Dad," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. "I can't keep bailing you out. It's not fair to me, and it's not helping you in the long run." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the hallway, his face a mask of anger and desperation. I went back to Mom's room, my heart heavy. I knew I'd made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Over the next few weeks, the situation with the house became increasingly dire. The bank started sending notices, and my father grew more and more frantic. He tried to convince me to change my mind, resorting to guilt trips, threats, even tears, but I stood firm. I couldn't do it anymore. One evening, Chloe came to my apartment. It was the first time she'd spoken to me since our argument about her small loan. She looked pale and worried. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice subdued. I invited her in and we sat down in my living room. It's about Mom, she said, her eyes filling with tears. She's getting worse. The doctors think the stress is affecting her recovery. My heart sank. This was exactly what I'd feared. Dad told her about the house, Chloe continued, her voice barely a whisper. He tried to downplay it, but she knows something's wrong. She's been asking questions, and he's been lying to her. I knew it, I muttered, a wave of anger washing over me. He hadn't learned anything. Ethan, you have to do something, Chloe pleaded. If Mom finds out the truth, it could kill her. I looked at my sister, her face etched with worry. I knew she was right. Mom's health was more important than my resentment towards my father. What do you want me to do, Chloe? I asked, my voice weary. I don't know, she admitted. But you always fix things. You always find a way. The weight of their expectations settled on my shoulders once again. They still saw me as the fixer, the one who would always come through, no matter the cost to myself. I thought about my mother, lying in that hospital bed, her health hanging in the balance. I thought about my father, his desperation and his inability to take responsibility. And I thought about myself, tired of carrying the weight of their problems. There had to be another way. I couldn't just give my father the money. It would only enable his behavior and wouldn't solve the underlying issues. But I couldn't stand by and watch my mother suffer either. The next morning, I went to see a financial advisor. I explained the situation, the loan against the house, my parents' financial struggles, and my own desire to help without enabling. He listened patiently, then offered a suggestion. Instead of giving your father a loan, perhaps you could offer to help your mother directly. You could set up a separate account for her medical expenses and offer to cover those. That way, you're helping her without giving your father access to the funds. It was an interesting idea. It would allow me to support my mother without directly bailing out my father. It would also give me some control over how the money was used. I decided to take his advice. I set up a meeting with my parents at the hospital. I told them that I wasn't going to give my father a loan to cover the house payments. My father's face fell, but I held up my hand before he could interrupt. However, I continued, looking at my mother, I am willing to help with your medical expenses, Mom. I've set up a separate account, and I'll make sure all your bills are taken care of. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Ethan, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do, Mom, I said, taking her hand. You've always been there for me. This is the least I can do. My father looked surprised. Then a flicker of resentment crossed his face. He'd been hoping for a much larger bailout. What about the house, then? He asked, his voice tight. Dad, you need to figure that out, I said firmly. I'm not going to enable your financial irresponsibility anymore. You made this decision, and you need to find a way to deal with the consequences. The tension in the room was palpable. My father was clearly unhappy with my offer, but he couldn't argue with the fact that I was helping my mother. Over the next few months, I kept my promise to Mom. I made sure all her medical bills were paid, and I visited her regularly at the hospital. Slowly but surely, she started to recover. As for the house, my father eventually had to face the music. He tried to negotiate with the bank, but they weren't willing to budge. In the end, they were forced to sell the house. It was a difficult time for everyone, especially my mother, who had lived there for over 40 years. They downsized to a small apartment, which was a significant adjustment. My father grumbled and complained, but my mother seemed surprisingly resilient. Perhaps the stress of the financial situation had been weighing her down more than we realized. Chloe, surprisingly, stepped up during this time. She helped them pack, find the new apartment, and get settled in. She even started taking on extra shifts at work to contribute to their expenses. It was like the crisis had finally forced her to grow up and take some responsibility. As for my father and me, our relationship remained strained. He never fully forgave me for not bailing him out of the house situation. But he also couldn't deny that I had been there for Mom. There was a grudging respect, but the easy camaraderie we once shared was gone. Years have passed since then. Mom's health has stabilized, Although she still has some lingering effects from the head injury, Chloe is still working hard and seems to have finally learned a thing or two about financial responsibility. My father, well, he's still my father. Stubborn and prone to making questionable decisions, but perhaps a little more cautious now. As for me, I finally took that vacation I'd been dreaming of. I bought a small cabin by the lake, a place where I can escape the pressures of family and just relax. I still help my mother out financially, but I've learned to set boundaries with Chloe and my father. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt guilty and selfish. But I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to say no. Our family will probably never be the picture-perfect ideal I once imagined. There will always be challenges, disagreements, and maybe even the occasional financial crisis. But we're still family. And maybe, just maybe, we're slowly learning how to navigate those tangled fishing nets together, without one person always having to bear the entire weight. And that, I suppose, is progress.